You're listening to Classic Business, which is brought to you by Liberty. I'm busy reading Douglas Kruger's Relentlessly Relevant 50 Ways to Innovate, and perhaps it's the fact that my wife is in the early stages of establishing a business, or that the topic of innovation is just one of those subjects that's quite hard to encapsulate, but I'm finding it an absolutely fascinating and refreshing take on the subject. It could also be the fact that Douglas Kruger writes it in a way that really endears, it invites you in, it leaves the jargon and snobbery at the door. And as he says in the opening chapters, it helps you take the red pill to continue down the rabbit hole and see the Matrix. For all of those Matrix fans, I think you'll understand the reference. Douglas, welcome to Classic Business.
Thank you very much. Yes, absolutely.
Now, Michael Jordan, no introduction needed, I think, calls the book an innovation in itself because it looks beyond the buzz and the hype around the word. And it's high praise indeed, and I think well deserved. From the beginning here, what led you to devote an entire book to the subject? You're an avid reader, for one.
And it has very much become something of a corporate buzzword and an area of interest over the last 10, 15 years. But I think the danger is that a lot of the time people buy into the notion that they should innovate. But then we get to the how do you, and I think that's where things start to fall apart. And thank you very much for the kind introduction. And that's precisely what I've tried to do. I've tried to take a very complex topic, a very difficult to access idea, and really break it down to simple levers. And in fact, to say, how do you take, where is the end of the ball of string? How do you begin to do it, regardless of the size of your organization?
And I think right in the beginning, you take this conversation that you had with your wife over a glass of wine, a woman after my own heart in that regard, and you really explain quite neatly, because I think the innovation is one of those, as you say, it's one of those fuzzy kind of concepts on a business strategy perspective that we struggle to define. But you found a way to say, we zoom out, have a high level look at things and start connecting the dots. Tell me about that.
And the conversation in the kitchen that you mentioned, it's almost the entire book given away in a single page. What happened literally was my wife said, all right, what's the book about? And I said, well, for goodness sake, I've spent months on the thing, and it takes content from various other books and South African business leaders and so on. And she said, yes, but tell me what it's all about. And in about 45 seconds, a minute, I then summed up essentially how innovation works. And to my surprise, it is actually possible to do that. And it's a very sort of simple case of, as you hinted at, zooming back from process, because we get so bogged down in how we do what we do every day. And then asking simple questions like, what are we actually trying to achieve? And the question, what are we trying to achieve, will yield very different results to the specific questions we ask every day when we're operational. And it's just different patterns of thinking and the courage to see them through to completion. In fact, quite a large part of the book really deals with the human psychology, the fear aspect of trying to drive an idea in the face of 1,000 no's. And in fact, I recently got done reading the new Elon Musk book, which I must say I highly recommend.
It's on my desk and on my list.
It's a brilliant one. The audio version is just as good, I must say. And he is really a paramount example, and of course a South African-born innovator, of a man who faced no's on a level that we cannot comprehend, and nevertheless pushed through. So quite often the bigger part of innovation is the courage to keep at it.
The courage to keep at it, and also the courage to follow the path less trodden, because it's another golden thread that I find runs through the book. The fact that we have this middle class fixation with that trodden path, the kind of conventional 2.5 kids, house in the suburbs, pension, study, get a good job, retire, die. The inherited script. And it's only once we start questioning that inherited script that we actually start seeing the Matrix, for lack of a better word.
And in fact, as you'll know from looking at the book, my own starting point was a youth in which I grew up, not desperately poor, but a little bit poorer than the kids around me in a middle-class neighborhood. And the result of that, at the time you feel a little bit sorry for yourself that you can't have the things people around you can have. But the difference in thinking that was instilled in me as a result has really stood me in good stead, and was the cornerstone and the basis for this book. And it's sort of building out from that idea. The notion then is different patterns of thinking coming from different cultures, backgrounds, and different levels of struggle are massively useful to the world of innovation. The more rigidly we adhere to the sort of middle-class script, exactly as you've just described it, the less creatively we think. So it's often the hardships and the difficulties we've gone through that really inform our ability to see around corners, to see different angles, to think about things in more creative ways.
And you were fortunate, as was I, to have parents that really instilled the love of reading in you from a very young age, and reading a broad range. We don't all have to be avid non-fiction, autobiographical kind of, textbook MBA readers. We can read everything from Dr. Seuss to Stephen King. It's about broadening that horizon and wellspring of knowledge.
And it's important that we do that. And the example that I give is that if you ask an engineer for a solution, you're going to get an engineering solution. However, if you ask an architect or an artist or a tattoo artist or your 4-year-old for a solution, you're going to get a very different perspective. And the practical lesson we learn out of that is that the more technically minded you are within a very narrow field, the less able you are to solve broad-level problems. And I give the example of James Cameron, who is the guy who came up with Avatar and Titanic,
yes,
the two most famous or successful movies of all time. And he actually talks about how he doesn't use a single technical skill that he learned at the beginning of his career. What he continues to use is the ability to think broadly. So it's really the creativity and the soft skills that we tend to underestimate that actually make us leaders in an industry. And that's then backed up by various studies, like one of the ones is I refer to a book called Excellent Sheep by William Dereshowitz. And he makes a very strong case for the idea that studying too narrow a technical field actually stops us thinking creatively. We do need certain tech skills, but we also need to be able to think around them. And that's where the soft skills come in, the creativity, the leadership, public speaking skills, ways of looking at things differently.
It all makes a very strong case for arts, for the humanities, for studying the kind of politics, philosophy, economics type degrees out there. And I really think in today's world where we seem to have a fixation in business for kind of outcomes-oriented education, that this is a really good example of why we need the arts. Now, in terms of brands, because this is also a strong marketing brand-focused book, you say that the old brands are failing to grasp something about innovation, and it's about remaining relevant to today's consumers. I mean, they're almost dinosaurs in a way.
Absolutely, and in fact, I call this one the meteorite strike that no one noticed. I think it's one of the most important discoveries in our business sphere over the course of, say, the last 10, 15 years, and it's not broadly being spoken about. It's a study that came out last year that found that on the whole, South African consumers are not responding well at all to the idea of legacy. And they are responding incredibly well to how you are innovating into my life today. And it's very interesting. If you just listen to, say, ads on the radio, you'll hear and quickly pick out the brands that are self-referential, that talk about their legacy, their importance, their world. And the study says it's leaving consumers cold in South Africa. What we need to be doing is talking about how I change things for you today. And of course, it's not just talking about, we need to be doing something about that as well. So the sort of the short version of that one is legacy is no longer working. Innovation is.
And brands that you do reference, the things like BMW, shared driving pleasure, are those ones that aren't self-referential, as you say, but play on the emotional experience. And that's really where consumers are plugging in.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the marketing manager of BMW South Africa was kind enough to give quite a considerable amount of input into the book. And I put that to him. I said, how is it possible that in the same year that the study found that legacy is leaving us cold, BMW, which is a brand that's almost exactly 100 years old, and therefore, in theory, is a legacy brand, how did you win coolest brand of the year?
Yes.
And he smiled for a moment and he sort of said, well, the clue is in the tagline. It's sheer driving pleasure. And implied in that is your sheer driving pleasure. So exactly as you say, they're not self-referential. They're talking about what we do in your universe, your feelings, your life, your world. And really, that's they're clearly doing it correctly.
Well, clearly. And Guy Kilfoyle is well referenced in the book. Very interesting indeed. Douglas, there's an instance, though, or a few instances, I should say, where brands would be well advised perhaps not to go and innovate. Here be dragons, so to speak. And I think Subaru is a good example of this.
Subaru is a fascinating one. One of the strange quirks about the way in which you market yourself is that the more focused you are on a very specific target market, quite often the broader your appeal tends to be. And quite frequently, and in the case of Subaru, this is an interesting one, marketers tend to miss this one. Now, the short version of the story in Subaru's case is a while ago, they discovered that their hardcore rally cars were really appealing to the mom's taxi market. So what they did, and herein lies the error, is they started saying South Africa's favorite mom's taxi. Now, the reason the moms were buying them as taxis is because they were hardcore rally cars. The second you start actually changing and softening the marketing message, what you will tend to see in a case like that is usually a spike up for a year or two and then a drop off and a decline in sales afterwards. The reason being that the brand becomes dissipated. So while they haven't exactly committed brand suicide there, they're on dangerous grounds.
Back to innovation here, and there was something that really struck me in the book when you were talking about open innovation. It reminded me of an interview that I conducted with the CEO of the Hyperloop last week, and what really struck me about the Hyperloop business, I mean, besides the technology and the feat of being able to travel between cities at almost the speed of sound, was the actual business model. Now, Hyperloop Technologies is crowdsourcing the design, so basically using a global R&D team, using technology and offering them equity in the business. So it's not open source, but it's just phenomenal to think that with almost zero overheads, you can assemble the world's best and brightest engineers to all work on a project of this scale globally. And that really reminded me of when you were talking about open innovation and the way the world of R&D is changing.
Absolutely, and it's astonishing that we still cling to the idea that our people, our tribe, our staff, our employees have to have the ideas. Ideas are now a global asset. You can fish for them wherever they happen to be. And I mean, we as South African business owners and entrepreneurs really need to expand our thinking a little bit and get beyond the notion that I have to hire someone in Roodepoort if my business is in Roodepoort, in Sandton if I'm in Sandton, and so on. And to start actually thinking, we have a species worth of ideas out there, and they are all accessible to the person who's willing to go fishing on a bigger level. And it's a bit of a shift in thinking.
It is. And, to borrow a quote from the book, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. And therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. So
Absolutely.
Why don't we see more unreasonable men then, Douglas?
Because we are hell-bent on training the script. And that, in fact, was our starting point for our discussion. Our schooling system, our culture, everything to do with the way in which we raise people toward the working world is geared toward creating basically compliant automatons. At the risk of sounding like something of a hippie, I'm not hugely anti-establishmentarian, but
that came through in the book, I must say, Douglas.
Did it? Oh, okay. I'll have to take ownership and say, all right, then I guess I am. I'll quickly go out and get the bell bottoms and grow the beard. But yes, we are so strongly focused on replicating the script that we really don't try to encourage different ways of thinking, different ways of looking at the world around us. And I think that's where the danger begins. And the subtle social pressures are largely invisible to us. And I give the example of, say, an 18th or 19th century Industrial Revolution era building, a factory. And you take a look at how these things actually operate and the way in which workers are led, a whistle is blown, they're led to their workstations during the day and so on, and you draw parallels to how a modern school works, and it's actually frightening. Now, it's not to pick on schools, but the point is to show that the kind of thinking that is handed down to us, inherited thinking, is invisible to us. We don't question why a school looks the way it does, and there actually is a reason. It's designed to grow the appropriate kind of employee for an 18th century Industrial Revolution era factory. But we're not questioning that because we don't see it.
Well, that's just one of the fascinating insights from the book, Douglas. Before I let you go, you end off in the final chapter with 50 ways or ideas to really spur innovation. And I'll let you end off sharing. I'm not going to go through all 50, but share your favorite one.
My favorite one is what I call burn down the building. And this is the one that I love to talk about because it's such an interesting idea. It's a thought exercise you can do with any size company. Get your team together and tell them, all right, the building has burnt down. We have lost the mechanism by which we service our customers. Everything that physically used to go into serving the customers that we serve is now gone. Tomorrow, we have to start serving the same customers with the same basic idea, but we cannot use anything we used yesterday. How do we do it? And the idea there is that you spur different ways of thinking about the same solution. And it also brings to light threats. If anybody else is able to spot a different way to do what you do, then that is a massive threat to your business. However, if you think of it first, you can get to market first. You become the radical disruptor.
Douglas Kruger, author of Relentlessly Relevant, 50 Ways to Innovate, a book that will forever alter your doors of perception and help you radically disrupt those around you. And that's a wrap for Classic Business this week. From retirement reform to innovation, from uber disruptive technologies and book reviews to new sustainable operating business models, it's been one of those weeks, a really great week, bringing you the stories that are shaping business every day. Next week, the investment panels turn passive investing into an aggressive art form with Liberty. Carrie Adams is up next with your weekly case of classic wine. From me, Michael, producer Jono Adams, and sound engineer Mdu Tele, thank you for tuning in. Have a great weekend and see you again on Monday for The Business, brought to you by Liberty.